Metallica dropped their first album, Kill 'Em All, in 1983, but the road to its release was far from smooth. The band was broke, as was their manager, and they had to deal with a frantic change of guitarists just before recording. Through it all, they managed to pull it off, creating a raw and aggressive album that would help set the foundation for the world of thrash metal. After a search for a new bassist, the band found Cliff Burton. In 1982, Cliff's band, Trauma, rolled into LA for a gig at the Whiskey A Go-Go. James and Lars were both in the crowd, and they were floored by Cliff's bass solo he took, some of which later became Anesthesia pulling teeth. Now, Cliff Burton was actually kind of over Trauma by this point. He felt that they were getting a little bit commercial for his own taste, and so he would jump at the chance, but with one caveat. Burton was a San Francisco guy through and through, and he was not keen on moving to LA. So if Metallica really wanted him in the band, they would actually have to make a big move. Well, they packed up and they headed north to El Cerrito, which is basically Burton's backyard. It was a major shift for the band, but they were determined to make it work. And this would prove to be the right move on many fronts, though, as San Francisco became the hotbed of the burgeoning thrash metal scene. They made a demo called No Life Till Leather before Cliff Burton joined. And this demo ended up in the hands of John Zazula, aka Johnny Z, who ran Megaforce Records. He had actually been a record store owner, but he launched the label on a whim in order to get the band's album out. So Metallica, with Burton on board, recorded their Megaforce demo in 1983. Later they packed up and moved to Old Bridge, New Jersey. At the time, Dave Mustaine was writing a lot of their material. He wrote one called The Mechanics while he was in a band called Panic that would evolve into the Four Horsemen. He was also credited with writing on Phantom Lord, Jump in the Fire, and Metal Militia. Interestingly, James Hetfield was a bit shy, so Mustaine would actually be the one bantering on stage with the crowd during those early shows. Coming off the release of their demo, No Life Till Leather, which had created an underground buzz among fans of this new thrash metal style that was becoming popular, things had been coming to a head in the Metallica camp. Dave Mustaine would get hammered and end up getting into fights with everyone. While the rest of the band were considered happy drunks, Dave was a full-on angry drunk, by all accounts. Things got particularly heated at one point between Dave and James. Dave had a tendency to pick on Ron McGovney, who was their bassist at the time. During one rehearsal, Dave brought his dog along. The dog jumped on Ron's car, scratching the paint on the hood. James got pissed off and kicked the dog, and so Dave did what any responsible dog owner would do in that situation, and cold-cocked James in the face. Ron then tried to intervene, and Dave ended up throwing him across the room. And Dave Mustaine actually got kicked out of the band for that, but he was able to smooth things over temporarily and talk his way back into the group the next day. At another point, Dave Mustaine poured beer all over Ron's bass, and eventually Ron got sick of it all and just left the band for good. These kind of shenanigans kept on, though, and the endless brawls were just wearing everybody thin. On April 11th, 1983, the band finally had enough. They woke Dave up and gave him a one-way ticket back to LA, and by this time, they already had Kirk slated to fill that lead guitar spot. Kirk Hammett's life took a wild turn when he got a call on April 1st, 10 days before Dave had been kicked out of the band. Kirk actually thought it was an April Fool's joke, but it was serious. Metallica had heard the Exodus demo, and they wanted him to fly out for an audition. Kirk Hammett had a week to learn 8 to 10 songs, and it was a tough task for him at the time. He had never even left California before, so he was in for a shock when he hit New York City. For one thing, the weather was freezing at the time. So he meets the band members at their rehearsal spot in Jamaica, Queens, and they were all just waking up. He decided to play Seek and Destroy for the guys, and he noticed that James and Lars were grinning at each other. Kirk didn't quite know what to make of it, wondering if maybe they were laughing at him. And of course, Kirk was kind of the nerdy, introverted type, so it's no surprise that he would have maybe had that kind of impression. But no, they were smiling because they knew they were going to give him the gig. So Hammett started playing shows with Metallica shortly after. At that point, the band was so broke, they literally had to keep playing shows just to be able to afford food. Soon after, the band was in the studio recording what would be Kill 'Em All at Music America Studios in Rochester. The recording process was a bit of a mess. They kept overdriving the mixing board, and the band tried to fix it by turning down the knobs on the gear, but they weren't happy with Paul Curcio, who was producing. But Paul was definitely experienced. He had a minor hit with a psychedelic folk band, the Mojo Men, and Paul also had founded the first studio in the Bay Area that had a 16-track recorder. And he also produced some demos for the Doobie Brothers. But as far as heavy music was concerned, it just wasn't Paul's thing at all. But Paul's rate was cheap, and Johnny Z had a tight budget, so Paul got the gig. The problem was, the guys in Metallica felt like Paul wasn't really into it, and he didn't do much to move things along. If anything, he was actually holding stuff up due to all the technical things he was running into. Also, Johnny Z wanted Kirk to copy Dave Mustaine's guitar solos note for note, but Kirk was not into that at all. So he made a compromise. He would use the first 4 bars or so of Dave's solos, and then he would finish most of the solos with his own parts. Johnny Z was fine with this, but he definitely wasn't fine with how the production was going, so he ended up taking over. He had another engineer, Chris Bubox, do the mixing. Johnny had a lot riding on this. He even used his mortgage to help fund the album, so he had to do whatever he could do to salvage things. Still, Kill 'Em All was definitely a step up from their earlier No Life Till Leather demo. Besides Hetfield's lyrical changes having more attitude, Kirk brought a more positive vibe to the band, and he did a hell of a job in the soloing department. And Kirk Hammett's rig was actually pretty minimal. He had plugged into James's Marshall Plexi, which had been modded with an extra gain stage. And then for that extra bite and sustain, he had put a tube screamer out in front of the amp. The album starts out hitting hard with Hit the Lights. It came from an unfinished tune called Leather Charm that Hetfield had wrote with Hugh Tanner. And Hugh Tanner was an old buddy of his who had actually introduced him to Lars. The song kicks in at a blistering 160 beats per minute, starting with distorted guitars that slowly fade in. Buzzsaw speed pick rhythms in the key of A kicking in a high gear. But for this one, Kirk stayed pretty faithful to Dave's solo from the No Life Till Leather sessions, but his tone was a lot cleaner, as was his picking approach. Kirk kicked out the familiar pentatonic licks for the intro solo, and then for the second solo, out came the wah. And he used repeated motifs like he did in the first solo, but in different keys. But he was totally in his element when that wah kicked in. At the end of the solo, he went into an ascending chromatic lick, ending with a killer bend. And then he continued, taking the song out with a nice burning intensity. Next up, The Four Horsemen, which is a redo of a song originally written by Dave Mustaine called The Mechanics. The original lyrics were kind of raunchy, all about getting it on at a gas station. Mustaine himself would later change the lyrics and put out a modified version of the song on Megadeth's first album, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. But James took it in another direction entirely. He got super into the whole Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse thing and wrote some lyrics about that particular topic. They also added a cool bridge to the song, letting the song take a total change to a different vibe under Kirk's soloing. He had gotten the idea for the bridge from that super catchy Sweet Home Alabama riff by Lynyrd Skynyrd. The Four Horsemen is a masterclass in rhythm playing, starting out with this kind of swingy E to D riff, and then going straight into that extremely fast gallop. The rapid change of power chords makes for the ultimate guitar exercise. And this is the first song showing that really elaborate arrangement of theirs, and Metallica would later run with this for some of their later epic tunes throughout their career. Motor Breath is considered by many to be the quintessential Metallica song from their early days. This was another song that James Hetfield had written with his buddy Hugh Tanner. Motor Breath is also the shortest Metallica song ever, clocking in at 3 minutes. Lyrically, it's about living life in the fast lane. The title itself, Motor Breath, screams speed and power. It's all about living on the edge. The chorus, Motor Breath, it's how I live my life, I can't take it any other way, was basically James Hetfield's life motto. Motor Breath is also pretty fast at a tempo of 174 beats per minute. The lead guitar, drums, and bass all jump in at the same time, making for an all-out oral assault. And this song really encapsulates Metallica's signature sound back in the day. Simple, raw, and full of energy. Motor Breath has been a big influence on metal bands ever since. Next up, Jump in the Fire, which is all about life on the road, and it's a pretty straightforward song based on the G minor blues scale single note riff. Palm muting abounds on this one. The drums are locked in with Cliff's pulsing bass and Lars Ulrich going crazy on the rolls in each chorus. The song also has a wicked riff that kicks in during Kirk Hammett's solos. According to Lars, this one was originally intended to sound like Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden. And this is the first one that Dave Mustaine ever wrote, and he had performed it with his old band Panic. It was originally based on sex, but then James Hetfield totally changed the lyrics. He wrote them from the devil's point of view. It became about the devil watching people doing really bad things to one another, and knowing that they're going straight to hell. And this song would get released as a single in the UK. And then for a true standout on the album, Anesthesia, Pulling Teeth, Cliff Burton's tour de force. The song kicks off with Cliff's bass solo, later having Lars laying down a heavy 4/4 beat behind him. And it's a classic Burton number, one that he had been playing since high school when he was playing with a band called Agents of Misfortune. And it's all about Cliff's signature lead-based style, with heavy distortion and a wah-wah pedal and some serious tapping going on. It also features some melodic modal improvisation and some arpeggiated shapes. And then once the drums kick in, it goes all out evil. Minor pentatonic and blues scale riffage over Lars' solid 4/4 beat. The engineer Chris Bubak actually starts the song out saying bass solos take one just before it kicks off. And yep, it proves that this was done in just one take. With this having been a staple in Cliff's bass solos during earlier gigs, it also turned out to be the one thing that blew James and Lars away. Hetfield had said, "We heard this crazy solo, we're all like, wait, where's the guitarist?" We counted the strings on Cliff's bass and then it clicked. He had the signature wah-wah going and a whole load of crushing overdrive. The song stands as one that if Cliff had done a solo album that was built off of this kind of playing, people would have totally eaten it up. Whiplash would end up being released as the first single from their album on August 8, 1983. The song has a killer beat and a bunch of 16th notes going crazy at 200 BPM. To put that into perspective, if one's heart was going at 200 BPM, they are pretty much a goner. And with this one, it's all about that tight playing and relentless beat. The lyrics are about the energy of a crowd going wild. Mark Wall, who's a rock journalist, said Whiplash was the moment that thrash metal was born. He said it was like thrash metal had just burst into the world, snarling and screaming with this one. The next track, Phantom Lord, was cooked up by James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Dave Mustaine. The title, Phantom Lord, is a total throwback to one of Hetfield's old bands, showing where he was coming from musically back in the day. The lyrics are all about power, war, and the sheer force of metal music. The central character, depicted by James, had a reign that was all about war and bloodshed. He was a total force of nature, and his sword was basically a symbol of his relentless, brutal style. The lyrics like "The leather armies have prevailed, and the Phantom Lord has never failed." You know this guy was all about winning. The Phantom Lord is a very heavy track, total sonic assault fitting in perfectly. And in 1998, Anthrax would cover Phantom Lord for a wrestling music compilation. You know it's heavy if it has to be used in something dealing with wrestling. The song No Remorse was written by James and Lars. An earlier version of the song shows up on Ron McGovney's demo from '82, back when he was still playing bass for them. They played it live a bunch with Dave Mustaine, and this early version had a different ending and the chorus was slightly different. The lyrics paint a pretty grim picture of war. They dive into the brutal, dehumanizing side of it, basically saying that violence is all around and there's no guilt or regret for what happens in war. The chorus is a real headbanger, hammering home the idea that violence just keeps happening and people just get numb to it. The lyrics position war as a metaphor for a machine that just keeps on consuming lives and land. It doesn't discriminate. It just keeps on destroying everything in its path. And the second half of the song gets even more intense, evoking images of the chaos of battle. The song is full of fast, aggressive riffs and the drums that hit like a freight train. The music perfectly matches the dark, heavy vibe of the lyrics, creating a super intense, chaotic atmosphere. You can practically feel the urgency and chaos of the song's story. And the structure and tempo are classic early Metallica, with those monstrous guitar riffs and relentless drumming. A bit of this song would be used in the super popular game Doom on the first level. And it was actually also covered by the band Diamond Head, who re-recorded their first album, Lightning to the Nations 2020. This shows just how much Metallica has influenced other bands, even those that influenced Metallica themselves. Seek and Destroy. It's the 9th track written by James and Lars and also appeared on No Life Till Leather. And it was the first track they actually had ever recorded in the studio. The lyrics talk about going after something relentlessly, like a rabid dog chasing a squirrel. The song's title, Seek and Destroy, is essentially a war cry. It basically screams, find them and take them down, using a military term to give the song a super aggressive feel. The song's opening riff is a classic, and Lars had said it was inspired by Dead Reckoning by Diamond Head. The original studio recording has a weird string bend at 3:46 right in the middle of Kirk's solo, and Kirk actually had admitted that it was a total accident. Lyrically, it's a song about overcoming obstacles, and it reflects the intensity of their live shows. Metallica had actually first performed this song back in '82, and it's been a staple of their set lists ever since. It's also a huge bar staple. Everybody covers this song, and it's probably the closest thing to an actual hit from this album. Some nice, slower, grinding rhythmic chugs, and then it kicks into overdrive during the solo section, and I'm right back again. And Kirk Hammett does this really cool question-answer motif with the rhythm during the first part of his solo, and you could hear the influence of Joe Satriani's teaching in his playing, especially during the fast, continuous descending line that he plays when the solo fully kicks in. Kirk's mistake was obviously a happy mistake because it didn't take away from the vibe that they were going for. And Seek and Destroy has also remained Metallica's show closer since 2004. Metal Militia closes out the album. This one was written by Lars, James, and Dave, and it's basically a rallying cry for hardcore fans to spread the metal gospel, becoming the metal militia themselves. Lyrics are all about rebellion and sticking together. This song really captures the raw energy of metal back in the early 80s, a time when metal was all about shaking things up. The lyrics, thunder and lightning, the gods take revenge, senseless destruction, all describe metal as not just being music, but metal being a force. It's like a call to arms, telling everyone to join the movement and become part of the metal community. And the music is super aggressive and fast as all hell. And the whole vibe of the song is pretty much like one big angry metal fist. And it's also a bit like Seek and Destroy in that it shifts between two keys, E minor and A minor. And then they take it into an even more interesting direction by modulating to B minor during the solo. The song's basic structure and tempo are classic Metallica, and is definitely the perfect way to end the album. The band played it live maybe 100 times in their entire career. It's a shame that they didn't play it more though, because it is a classic. Now the original title of the album wasn't going to be Kill 'Em All. It was actually going to be called Metal Up Your Ass. The cover was supposed to be a hand holding a dagger coming out of a toilet, but Johnny Z thought the wiser because he was pretty sure distributors were not going to carry it. Of course, this pissed Cliff off quite a bit, and when talking about the distributors, he had said they should just kill them all, and the title stuck. The Cliff Burton not only contributed to the album's title, but also the cover. He had told Gary L. Hurd, who was the photographer, to use a bloody hammer in the artwork. Supposedly, Cliff brought a hammer everywhere that he went, like it was a lucky charm or something. Cliff even kept it in his luggage. When all was said and done, Megaforce Records actually put out the first 15,000 copies. Everybody was as broke as hell, and Megaforce had to press the album in batches of 500 copies at a time. But by the end of 1983, Kill 'Em All had actually sold 17,000 copies in the US. Like the punk bands, Metallica spread their music by trading tapes with other people and word of mouth. The album got some attention in the UK and the US from underground music mags like Metal Forces and Metal Mania. It didn't make anything like the Billboard 200, though it did in '86, but that wasn't until Master of Puppets would blow up. With it being their first studio album, it was definitely a step in the right direction. Scott Ian, Anthrax's guitarist, was blown away by how heavy the album was and how well the songs were written. And the album was also a huge influence. Many said it was as impactful as Iron Maiden albums. Mike Portnoy, the drummer from Dream Theater, said Kill 'Em All was way faster than any of those new wave of British metal bands. And he had also remarked that Burton's bass solo was probably the best part of the album. So the band went on tour to support it in 1983 and called it the Kill 'Em All for One tour. They were joined by Fastway, and then 2 months later the tour wrapped up. They hit the road again in September, this time with another British band called Raven for the Metal Massacre tour. And though it was a humble beginning, Metallica were well on their way to becoming one of the biggest metal bands in the world. Metallica had quite the busy year, touring places like Italy, Germany, France, and Belgium, and they wrapped up the European part of their tour at the Marquee Club in London. And right after that, they went straight to Sweet Silence Studios in Copenhagen to record their second album, Ride the Lightning. And it was worth noting that by this time, Kill 'Em All had already sold 60,000 copies around the world. Pretty good accomplishment for a young band. Still though, by the very end of it all, Metallica was still broke, and they definitely had started making a name for themselves. The next album they would record, Ride the Lightning, would nudge them up a little further in popularity, setting the stage for their quintessential album, Master of Puppets, which would catapult Metallica to legendary status. But this brief look into the infancy stage of Metallica was really interesting in the fact that unlike a lot of artists or groups I have covered, Metallica really came from a hard background. They did not come up the easy way. The group definitely paid their dues. I want to thank my subscribers so much for all your feedback and inspiration. And if you've not had the chance to subscribe, please make sure to smack that subscribe button. And while you're at it, smack the like button as well. And I want to thank you so much for watching.